Hello, gorgeous humans. This is the Hot Girls Learn Hockey podcast. My name is Sarah. First and foremost, apologies for no episode last week. Every time that I tried to film, it sounded like I was filming like dead smack in the middle of a tornado. And just didn't feel like that would have made for a very good episode. So I fixed it. We should be good. God, I hope that it's good, or else I'm going to be spending this entire time filming and then having like really shitty audio. But I believe it should be good. So, yeah, welcome back. If you forgot what we do here on this podcast, we talk all about all things hockey, hockey related, ice hockey. I always have to be specific. Ice hockey is what we talk about here. The history of it, how it works, blah, 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 blah. I did mention in my last episode that this one is going to be another history-based episode. So if that is not your bread and butter, it's okay if you skip this one, because next episode is going to be really, really exciting. I'm going to explain and break down the Stanley Cup, the history behind it, and also how the playoffs work, especially because we're leading into that territory, at least as of when I'm filming it. So I'm filming this in March. But that's not what we're talking about today. Today, we are doing another history video. This is the history of hockey itself, as well as hockey broadcasting. Now, I got asked why I'm doing so many history videos, which I've done one, and this is going to be number 2. So I don't know if that's too many, if 2 is too many, but I'm a firm believer in that in order to understand where we are currently, we need to understand where we came from. In any topic, I believe in that. You know, history is doomed to repeat itself if we don't educate ourselves. And that's not on that. Plus, I'm a history buff. Let me have fun. That is what is the key. Let me have fun. I have fun researching this stuff. And by the way, if you're watching this on YouTube, you're probably noticing that I look a little different. I started wearing my glasses again because my contacts were giving me massive headaches. It also just felt like wearing glasses in this history video will make everything look, I don't know, more official. It'll probably make me look way more smart than I actually am. So that is a change that we'll be seeing. Not consistently. There probably will be videos or episodes where I wear my contacts, but there'll probably be episodes like this where I wear my glasses. I don't know. We'll see how I like it, you know. Also, I just realized this entire time I've been filming, I've been looking at myself and not the camera. Sorry. My audio listeners, you're probably like, I didn't even notice, Sarah. Well, duh, you're only listening to it. All right. Well, enough of that really long-winded introduction. Let's get into things. Actually, no, before we get into things, also want to remind anybody who's watching this for the first time, if you see me looking down, I'm looking at my cutesy little notes that I have. It's my timeline, literally a timeline, especially for this video, to help me keep my thoughts in order and really go through the points that I want to go through. All right. Okay. All those messages are done with. Now we are getting into the episode. Now, it's hard to actually, pinpoint an exact, country or year or like civilization, whatever, where hockey as an activity began in, different ancient civilizations like ancient Greece or ancient Egypt, or even back in like the Middle Ages as well. They all had different like variations of a stick and ball game, which I guess one could argue might also, be like lacrosse or might be like golf, but like they didn't know what these things were. At least we're assuming that they didn't know. So it's really, all this to say, it's really hard to say which country started it all, like the earliest, but what we do know is that in Scotland in the early 1600s there was this it's also a stick and ball game called Oh god, I'm going to butcher this name. Its other name is called Shinty, but like not the actual term or like name for this game is called Camier or Chamier. It's Chamiare. But anyway, like I said, it was played on ice in the early 1600s in Scotland, and it was kind of it was like the early like what's it called? Oh my gosh. It's like an early model of it's prototype, that's the word I'm looking for. It was kind of like the early prototype for ice hockey. And it was usually like the actual like puck was just either like a rubber or wooden ball that they would hit around with the sticks. And this, like, the game became very popular when it started, people started playing games and such, or like matches or what have you. And it spread to London shortly after its conception in Scotland. And then in the 1850s, that's when the game spread to Eastern Canada. So Eastern Canada, think Toronto, Montreal, Ottawa, that area of that country. It became very, very popular over there. Also, a little side note, which I thought was very interesting, was that the actual term or like name hockey, it can be traced back. The earliest we can trace it back officially is 1773. It was in a book published in England called Juvenile Sports and Pastimes. I know that the term juvenile or juvenile, whatever, however you want to pronounce it, I know that the definition of that has kind of changed, and the connotation behind it's kind of changed over time and over the years. I want to think that they didn't mean it as like, oh, that's so juvenile. I want to think that they meant it like sports and pastimes that the young people like, but who knows? And there could have been an earlier known instance of the term hockey being used, but this book, like it being printed in this book, is just the earliest printed version that we have. So it's kind of where we have to go on as far as like now of this year, 2025. But there could have been this random little child in a village in England that's just said the word hockey, and he might have been the first person to ever say it, but we'll never know. Sorry, kid. That was just an interesting little side note. So yeah, we're in the 1800s. There's been games and matches in like what's called hockey, like, or not hockey, but what's called like skating clubs in Canada. Basically, it's mostly men's, which we'll get into women's hockey as well in a little bit. But there's all these little skating clubs that are popping up in Canada, and then now I brought to the year 1875. Specifically March 3rd, 1875, where the first like on record organized ice hockey game was played. And this is according to the International Ice Hockey Federation. It was played between it was two teams technically, but each team was made up of men from the Montreal Victorious Skating Club. So it wasn't like two like official like teams like how we think of an organized game nowadays. They all belonged to the same hockey or skating club. They just divided themselves into two teams, and they played like the first recorded game. And recorded game is a very important part of that sentence, because there was evidence that earlier organized games were played in the US and in Canada, but there's no record of it. So there's evidence, but there's no official record like there is of this very specific, like every source that I saw very specifically mentioned March 3rd, 1875, Montreal's Victoria's Skating Club as like the first organized game. So we're going off of that. And this game was played on an indoor ice rink. And instead of using when they were played shinty, and that's such a stupid word, instead of using the wooden or rubber balls that they would use, they used a flat wooden block and it was again their version of a puck, and it would be modernized and made out of rubber in later iterations. But in this very first game, it was a wooden puck. And then instead of there being a net like we know today, it was the block was being shot through two flags that were on the ice, and they were put about like 8 feet apart, and that served as their net, so to speak. So now by 1893, this is when the Dominion Hockey Challenge Cup, which is now known as the Stanley Cup, was awarded to the Montreal Hockey Club. This was the very first team to win the Stanley Cup. I'm not going to go too much into it. This is kind of the only fact that there's another fact later on, but this is the only one of the only mentions I'm going to make of the Stanley Cup in this episode, just because, like I mentioned earlier, next one, which I'm actually filming right after I film this one, is going to be more about the Stanley Cup, the history and how it's won and such. But for timeline's sake, I had to mention this because it's very important to hockey. So that was in 1893. Now by 1899, hockey has started becoming really, really popular in the northeastern United States. So think, the New England area, New York, etc. So they started forming their own kind of clubs and such, and playing games probably on frozen ponds, just because it gets really cold over in that area. I assume. I've never been there. And by the late 19th century, some organized leagues had started forming in Canada. Now, this is where we are introducing the ladies. Where my ladies at? Ladies are playing hockey. That was stupid. Actually, there's photographic evidence and such of even the woman in Lord Stanley's family, and that, is the same Stanley from the Stanley Cup, that they're participating in playing ice hockey games. From what I've learned, and I'm not going to go too in depth, like I said before, I'm doing this, literally the next episode is about the Stanley Cup and the history behind it, but everyone in that family was hockey obsessed. The women were no different. There's literally pictures of them playing ice hockey with Lord Stanley's 2 sons. So that's really fun and fresh and cute. And then in 1902, there was actually the first women's ice hockey championship tournament. It was a tournament between Montreal and, it's another French word that I'm going to mispronounce, Trois Rivières. Yeah, sure. Yeah, we'll go with that pronunciation. I'm so sorry if anyone listening to this speaks French. I, again, mentioned this in my last video. Took 2 years of French in high school. Don't remember a thing except for stupid terms. But yeah, 1902 was the first, it's credited as the first women's ice hockey championship tournament, which is really cool, and put a pin in history of women's ice hockey because I will come back to it in a couple of points later. So that was in 1902. Now we're up to 1920. 1920 was when a team from Canada won the first hockey world championship at the Winter Olympics. And then in 1923 is another big boom in hockey history. It's when Norman Albert, who was, I believe, a news reporter for this either radio show or newspaper or something in Toronto. I can't remember what he worked for, but he made the first radio broadcast of a hockey game. I say that very loosely because it wasn't the entire game. He really only described the action of the third period of the game, and I believe it was really only the main parts, and then obviously who won. But it wouldn't take long until after that. I believe that one was in early February / late January. I guess I didn't write down the date of when that broadcast was, but on February 22nd of that same year, 1923, was when the first complete game was broadcasted over the radio. So same year, we had our first broadcast, partial broadcast, and then we had the first complete game broadcasted over the radio, which is cute and fun and fresh. And then it wasn't until actually the late 1940s that had some of the first TV broadcasts in New York and Detroit. I couldn't find evidence if there were a ton of, or if there were any radio broadcasts in the US of any hockey games. Only thing I could really find was this fact with that, in the late 1940s, there was some of the first TV hockey broadcasts in New York and Detroit. But again, that's TV, not radio. But I guess at this point, maybe TV was becoming more popular than radio. This is just speculation on my point. I just have a feeling that because hockey wasn't as huge in the US as a whole as it was in Canada as a whole, that, radio just really didn't give a shit. And it's funny to me that the 40s was when there was some TV broadcasting of hockey in the US, but it wasn't until October 11th of 1952 that the first televised game of hockey was broadcasted in Canada. Like, it's crazy to me that the US got a TV broadcasting of hockey before Canada did. I mean, to be fair, this game was a few weeks after television had arrived in Canada. And so I guess they just didn't really have the resources to broadcast it over TV. I digress. That was just a very interesting fact that I learned. Back to another little fact about the girlies. In 1961 in Canada, women's hockey started spreading to more Canadian universities. I think what I read was that like the Canadian government really pushed for more universities to include women's hockey in their kind of regime of teams and sports that are offered, which is very interesting, very progressive for the 60s, definitely. Holy shit. We love that. And now between like the 60s and like 60s, 70s, 80s, hockey is still that girl. She is that girl in Canada. And I mean, she's still that girl to this day. But it's during these years, yes, the NHL was a thing, and, games were being played, Stanley Cups were being won, but hockey just really was not that popular in the US. Like I said, poppin' in Canada, not so much the US. And it wasn't even until the 1979 and 1980 season that the ESPN first started broadcasting hockey games. I think it's just accredited to the fact that, the NHL just wasn't a super popular league in the US. It's not like America's pastime, baseball with MLB, or football with the NFL, or even basketball with the NBA. Like, she was kind of on the bottom of the totem pole, if we're being completely honest here. Which, we love a slow burn. She's like the Sabrina Carpenter of broadcasted sports in this time period. Arguably she is kind of still the Sabrina Carpenter. She's like Sabrina Carpenter at this point in like Girl Meets World. Like, she's there and people know about her, but not a ton of people know about her. I would say, I actually argue and say that she is also still kind of in that phase. Actually, nowadays I'd feel like she's in the Sabrina Carpenter phase of Skin just came out, and there's that whole thing about Driver's License that she's in. So like, people know about her, but they know about her for like the wrong reasons, or like they know about her for the more like scandalized or just action-packed things instead of what makes her a good performer. That's a really good reference, Sarah. Well, pat on the back. I'm gonna take a sip of my drink just for that. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention the drink. We have a drink today, and the Sharks cup is back. Yay, because I'm not wearing anything Sharks related except for my blanket. But cheers. I got a lime Surge. Not gonna say the brand name, but Surge. If you know what you know. Wow. What a taste. Okay. Where was I? Oh, yeah. I'd also just like to mention that throughout all this as well, across Europe, there were teams and leagues that had started to form and were like already formed. I really, to be honest, really only looked up the history of hockey in Canada and the US specifically, just because those are the two that I was privy to, or two countries that I was privy to, and those are really the two countries whose teams I watch and I follow, especially because the NHL only has Canadian and US teams. I'm sorry, Europe. I'll do episodes about like leagues and teams in Europe. I promise. I'm getting there. I'm but a girl. I'll say this till the cows come home. But yeah, all this to say, during this time as well, Europe's popping with their hockey. Other teams or other countries have their teams that are forming and such. And still, prior to 1981, national coverage of ice hockey was pretty spotty in the US. Like, yeah, ESPN had broadcasted some seasons, or broadcasted some games, certain networks started broadcasting some, but it just wasn't huge. And like, even only a select few Stanley Cup championships were even broadcasted here in the US. All of them were broadcasted, or like most, if not all, were broadcasted, once they started broadcasting them over in Canada, like all the championships and playoffs and such. But the US was just like, we'll pick and choose who we want to, show off, I guess. Which leads me to the point that I made the last video about the 80s and hockey. I went to a whole spiel about it the last episode. You can watch that or listen to it, whatever. Just know Wayne Gretzky and Miracle / like Miracle on Ice. I believe when I was doing more research, like while I was editing the last episode, I realized Miracle was like a movie made about that hockey game, or the Winter Olympic hockey game that I mentioned. It was made in the 90s, but the actual kind of like documentary, like showcasing the actual, games and such, was called Miracle on Ice. So I thought that I had gotten my facts mixed up, but I didn't. Which was really nice to know that I'm not just sitting here spouting out facts that aren't true. I could be, but unknowingly spitting out facts that aren't true. So yeah. Miracle on Ice, Wayne Gretzky, really think that boosted hockey's popularity in the US, especially in the 80s. And I think like probably popularity went down a little bit after that. The 90s really weren't too poppin'. Once kind of the hype of hockey kind of died down and like the 90s started, I don't think it was as poppin' as it was. And in 1995, Fox started a hockey contract, but then like only lasted like 4 years, and they got out of the hockey game in like 1999. And like the NHL's popularity really didn't start growing in the US until after the NHL Winter Classic in 2008. So we've come a long way with hockey. As a sport, hockey, broadcasting as a whole, we've come a very long way since the very first game that was broadcasted and on TV or on the radio. It gains, some press once Stanley Cups like come around and such, because then it's another, game or a sports championship that people like to watch. But other than that, she's popular, don't get me wrong. I think especially it's gaining more popularity right now. Really a lot after that Four Nations tournament. More specifically when Canada and the US played that first game, and had like the 3 fights in the first 9 seconds. Which, shout out to my Pookie, Matthew Tkachuk. He's on injury reserve right now, and we love and miss him so much. I love and miss him so much. I need him back on the ice. I need him to play again. But, oh my gosh. See, every time I mention Matthew Tkachuk, I get so off topic in my head, and I'm like, oh my gosh. I just start thinking about him. Love him. Love that man. Wish him all the best. He has like a groin injury. That's bad. Doesn't sound good. We've been talking about Major League Hockey. Minor League Hockey is also a thing, and it also it has more limited coverage. There's really only one network in the US that shows minor league hockey. It's called the America One Network, and it currently is the one that broadcasts AHL, which is the American Hockey League, and ECHL games. ECHL is the East Coast Hockey League. They're the 2 major minor league hockey leagues. If that makes any sort of sense, like out of the minor league hockey, they're like the 2 major leagues, which is a very interesting sentence to try to get through. Some other facts I want to say is that in 2004, the NHL announced that games would be broadcasted across Europe. So did Europe just contribute hockey players to the NHL, but then didn't get to watch the games? Very interesting. Like until 2004. Very interesting. And even countries in Asia didn't start broadcasting games until the 2008 to 2009 season. So that's also crazy that these things came so late in the game. Like, these countries are so late to the part. They're tardy to the party at this point. Oh my gosh, guys. Now we're bringing it back to my girls now. Sadly, it's been a couple of decades since we talked about them. Last time we talked about them was the 60s, and now we're up to 2019. This isn't to say that women's hockey, that entire spiel I just went on about all the other facts, women's hockey had been played. Teams had been formed. Leagues had been formed. Like, was women's college hockey. There's, like, minor league women's hockey, whatever. Like, there are teams and leagues that were formed for women's hockey. It didn't just disappear just because I didn't talk about it. I just really want to make that clear. But it's kind of sad because it wasn't even until 2019 when the Professional Women's Hockey Players Association was founded. And it wasn't until 2023 that the PWHL was founded. If you don't know what that is, it's the Professional Women's Hockey League. Think like the NHL, but for women. And except they don't get to play for the Stanley Cup. I can't believe it took until 2023 to get a professional women's hockey league. Or to get the Professional Women's Hockey League. That's actually bonkers to me. But can't ask for much, I guess. Can't ask for the bare minimum at this point. Let's be real. And like I said before, currently there is kind of a resurgence of popularity in hockey. I feel that at least in the past year, maybe year and a half, there's been a bigger spotlight on hockey. There's the whole Four Nations stuff. There's also the Face Off docuseries on Amazon Prime. It's just, the Tkachuk brothers were just on the, New Heights podcast with Jason and Travis Kelce. Like, bonkers, guys. And even outside of just hockey, like the NHL and stuff, Ice Hockey Romance, which is literally how I got into hockey, has been popping. If you've read Icebreaker, you know. Also, if you're judging the genre of that whole kind of books just based on Icebreaker, please know there's so many other ones. Like Elle Kennedy's books are so good. I got asked to make an episode about that book series. I mentioned it in my very first episode on why I like got into hockey, that will be an episode, I promise, to the one specific person, very specific person who asked. I promise you, I will film a video about that series. I need to like invest in a whiteboard or something, that way I can connect, because so many characters in that. Oh, there's so many characters in that universe. But yeah, another kind of shorter episode for this week's up. Again, apologies about missing last week, but we should be back on track. I believe I have all my technical difficulties handled, and I was really disappointed that I couldn't upload last week. These episodes are so much fun to film, but like when things don't cooperate with me, it's hard to do anything. But thank you so much if you have stuck around this long, listening or watching this. I love making these episodes. I love filming these little videos, and yeah. Next week is all about the Stanley Cup. I'm gonna go over the history of, how like it's kind of evolved a little bit. I'm not gonna go over so many specifics about like the history of the actual conception of the trophy and the championship tournament. What I will go into specifics about, especially because learning the way that playoffs, championships, whatever works, is really hard for me to understand. It took me a really long time, which this is a very embarrassing fact, but it's true, and I'm gonna speak my truth and live my truth. It took me a very long time, probably until I was in college, to learn how a bracket system worked. Let that sink in. And that's just, where my intelligence level is at in terms of sports. But all this to say, I will go into specific details about how teams are chosen to compete for the Stanley Cup, the point system of how they get there, the layout of playoffs, and all that good stuff. So that way, when the time comes, which will be, the playoffs will start in April and they'll go until June, you will be informed and you'll be in the know. And you'll have fun, all while knowing what's going on, which will be really great. At least, if you decide to follow the Stanley Cup playoffs this year. If you do, that's great. If you don't, that's okay too. You can always retain this information and use it towards next year's Stanley Cup or the year after that. I don't know. That's the fun of the internet. Everything's here forever. Okay, I'm getting off topic. I'm going to stop filming this video and then go film the next episode. Yay! Okay. Thank you so much for watching or listening. If you're watching this on YouTube, please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. If you're watching this on Spotify, please don't forget to give this a good rating. If you're able to. And yeah, thank you so much for listening. This has been the Hot Girls Learn Hockey podcast. My name is Sarah Craik, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.